one thing before we start. So before I welcome our presenters, I wanted to show you, we have results from the coaching planning survey that I sent out a while ago about the topics you all want to know more about, speakers and facilitators you'd recommend, your biggest challenges with coaching, and then formats you'd like to use for the meeting. And just so you know, book study was very popular, and there were a few ideas within that. And so I am looking into the book study or special issue study idea. I wanted to know if anyone is interested still in, who hasn't had a chance to respond to the survey. If you are interested, if you would just either raise your hand or put something in the chat pod, that would be great, because then I can, send out the link again, and I'll give a little more time before I do the final planning. So I'll leave it at that because I don't want to take too much time from the presenters. Stop sharing my screen so the presenters can put their PowerPoint up. And we are very lucky today to get to hear from Ohio. They have been working on peer coaching. They have a manual for peer coaching. They have figured out the challenges, the implementation challenges, how to overcome them. They've really done a nice professional job about how to support peer coaching, and especially in a state that has a lot of things going on. I always say that Ohio is a complex state to work in. And so Carolyn Turner is, she has her K-12 reading endorsement, and she has been working as a school improvement consultant, and she's also a regional early literacy specialist. And so she has a lot of understanding of what's happening with the science of reading and how to apply it to classroom practice. And then Michelle. Oh, Michelle, I just lost your bio. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I could shed some light. So I'm an Ohio literacy lead.
Great.
I was a regional early literacy specialist and a special education consultant. So I spent a lot of time working in special education, and now I just get to play in the literacy waters. And I'm an adjunct professor at a couple different universities and on our local IDA board.
Great. Thank you so much. So I am going to turn it over to our two peer coaching experts. Thank you all so much for being on with us today.
Okay, let's see here.
Okay.
Glenn, are you sharing the slides, or are we going to share ours?
I was going to say, yeah. I think Glenn was going to put them up for us.
No, I had thought that you guys were going to share.
Oh, well, see, there we go.
Okay, well, now we solved that problem.
Sorry about that confusion.
You want to do that, Michelle?
I'm doing it right now. Sharing here we go. Okay. So before we ask you all some questions, Carolyn and I had some questions that Jennifer brought to us, and we thought we would just begin by including those here for you. One of the questions was, why did Ohio in their SPDIG work decide they needed peer coaching? And one of the big reasons was because our SPDIG work is entirely surrounding the science of reading, and we needed a way to ensure that what we were investing a lot of money into was actually going to be happening in classrooms, because professional development is great, but we know it doesn't always make it into classroom application. And we wanted to find a way to do that without mandating instructional coaches. And Carolyn can speak a little more to that component in terms of why we went peer coaching instead of standard instructional coaching.
Yeah, so we explored this idea of peer coaching, like Michelle said, because we wanted a way to ensure that professional development learning was actually getting applied into the classrooms and implemented in classrooms. And some of our grant work has involved funding of dedicated instructional coaches. However, we understand and know that that is not always a sustainable model for many districts once the grant period is over, or if they're not awarded funds but are still receiving professional learning, they can't do that. So we wanted a way to ensure that learning was going to happen through their teacher teams, which we'll start to talk about in a little bit. And so if we look towards peers, coaching peers, that was a more sustainable model. Not that we don't appreciate and know the value of instructional coaches, we just understood that for many districts that just was not a possibility, that the funding options were not there. So that's where we were with that.
And if you guys want more information, so our peer coaching manual is a PDF file that you have access to, and we've indicated on each slide where you can find the specific information in the manual that addresses this. So for example, section 2 has our rationale for why to use peer coaching. So for districts who are interested, why this would be a viable service delivery option for them. So we always include that on the bottom of the slide. So our next question was about our bases, our roots. We both were regional early literacy specialists, we affectionately called RELs, in the state of Ohio. And so basically we had to be coaches in the classroom as part of the implementation of Ohio's state systemic improvement plan. And so the question was, what lessons from those experiences shaped the peer coaching model the way we see it now? And as you look in our ideas for implementation in section 7 and 8, you'll see a lot of the experiences we had in terms of being coaches and actually coaching coaches in these districts, and how to make this work well. What are things that peers could do to help each other in their professional growth and implementation of the professional development? And Carolyn alluded a little bit to those conversations that happened during team times. And we found that those were very productive, and you didn't have to have an instructional coach in there, but you did need to have someone who understood the professional development they were receiving and were willing to guide other conversation.
And it was really based on a common professional learning. So as regional early literacy specialists, we were working with districts who were receiving a common professional development type program. And so the learning that they were receiving was very strategic. And so our coaching could be very targeted as well. And so when we talk about those, the coaching and planning during team times, there were many times when that was the only time available to talk with the teachers. They just didn't have, planning other planning times or off-site times or things like that where we could reach them. So we found that, kind of that grouping together, and the teams really weren't, when we say teams, they were teams of maybe no more than 5 to 6 teachers at a time that we were working with. So we were able to really, think about that grade level coaching as part of a common professional learning. And so we targeted our coaching based on what they were learning and how they were applying that learning to the classroom. And then a whole grade level then was able to talk about, things to try and strategies to use, and hey, come see my classroom, and how I'm doing this, that sharing of opportunity.
Okay, so if you look at section 7 and section 8 in the peer coaching manual, you will see very specific ideas in terms of how to make this work, following the model that we're going to explain here in a second, the difference between collaborative and formal peer coaching, because we break it down and define them, and then we take them into implementation stages of implementation. So one of the questions that came up from Jennifer was, where did we pull our definition from? And we were very lucky in that Ohio already had a definition of coaching, and so it really did help to shape our work. ODE has a definition of both systems coaching and instructional coaching, and that should not say peer, that should say instructional, I'm sorry, in our state systemic improvement plan. And because this was the basis of our work when we were regional early literacy specialists, and because the SPDIG grant really did continue that work on, we wanted to use the same model. And the next slide here, I'll show you what that model looks like, because that really informed our practice. So it really informed the peer coaching model. So Ohio's coaching model includes instructional, which is, one-on-one coaching. And this is all centered around literacy, because that's what our state systemic improvement plan, as well as our school personnel development grant, were both focused on, which was literacy practices. So we have instructional one-on-one with teachers or specialists, or maybe, a teaching team, whereas systems coaching is where we're working at those grade level teams or with leaders. and we were analyzing data, not specifically talking about instructional strategies, but more data analysis or systemic changes that needed to happen. So because we had this definition already in place, this is what we played off of.
And some of us found in the regions where we were working was that in order to get to the instructional coaching piece, we had to develop for them the systems code, the systems model. Some of us were working in districts that already had well-defined improvement processes in place. Others kind of had to build those up first, and we found that they had to have a level of teaming and data. They didn't know how to analyze data and what data to collect before we could move into those instructional coaching practices.
So these are excerpts from pages 3 and 4 in our model for peer coaching. And so here you'll see at the top where we took the instructional and systems coaching framework from Ohio and we adjusted it into what components would work for peer coaching. So and peer coaching would include observations, modeling, co-teaching, and follow-up conversations. And co-teaching was a big part of that work. Having the title teachers and intervention specialists push their instruction into the classroom was always encouraged so that they could learn from watching each other interact with students. And then the systems coaching was using those teaming systems that Carolyn mentioned. We call them teacher-based teams, so the grade level teams, and then building leadership teams, which is membership from across each grade level meeting as a building monthly. So we broke it down that way, but then we went further and broke peer coaching down into collaborative, which was a more informal coaching versus formal coaching, following something like most people are very familiar with Jim Knight's coaching cycles. So we felt that the in for most peer coaches would be the more collaborative coaching, that informal. And so when we do our training with teachers, we really start there. This is how you can do this collaboratively at the systems and the instructional level, whether you are talking in teacher-based teams or you're doing a book study together, or you're just observing each other in action. That's going to be a much more informal way, and we figured there would be a little less pushback. And so that was our in to begin with. Okay, next question. Peer coaching efforts across multiple initiatives. Can you tell us how this has worked so far? Are you finding efficiencies and improved systems as a result? And we know that this work has spanned our state systemic improvement plan, our school personnel development grant work, our Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy grant work, and then we have a new grant, and it's really kind of the foundation for even the development of the new federal grant we received for literacy. And all of this is grounded in Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement. So everything aligns. I don't know if Carolyn, if you want to go deeper with that in any way.
Yeah, no, it is specific. We are specifically calling it out in the new comprehensive literacy school development grant, in that we understand that, sometimes instructional coaches can be, an expensive endeavor. And while valuable, we also wanted to offer the opportunity for districts to still have coaching occur, but then leverage the funds that they have possibly in other ways if they so fit and saw the need.
Because one of the things that Carolyn alluded to earlier is as these districts were receiving grant money, they would fund their coaches in the short term, but then when the grant money ran out, the coaching went away. And we know that coaching is ongoing, it's never ending. So we wanted to make sure that there was that sustainability, and this model does allow for sustainability. And then the next question is definitely a Carolyn one in terms of how will you measure the impact of peer coaching? Because right now we haven't developed that, but Carolyn is leading a wonderful state work group planning for next steps in this work.
Yeah, so in my work group with the regional early literacy specialists, what we are doing right now is we are developing kind of a framework, almost like a coaching. I think Jim Knight calls them a kind of coaching playbook that you can use in your teacher teams, and questions to ask each other during each kind of stage or step or phase of the process. So when you're first deciding, what data to look at or what you're looking at, how to analyze the data. There's a series of questions that we ask ourselves in these teams. When we get into, planning for instruction, and we get into, selecting evidence-based practices, or looking at specific strategies, this group is really working on defining what this would look like, because it's great we have this handbook and we've, outlined barriers and, solutions and, things like that. But the nitty gritty of, okay, I'm sitting with 5 or 6 people around this table. What do you want us to talk about? This is kind of a guide of questions, and it's all based on literacy professional learning. We're trying to keep the questions as generic as possible in terms of literacy. Many of our districts are receiving some pretty specific professional learning, but we wanted to keep it, we're trying to keep the questions as general as possible, so as that it could be used with any professional learning that's grounded in the science of reading. But it's basically kind of a playbook for the facilitator or the peer coach to kind of open up and say, okay, we're looking at this data. What does this data tell us? And now, based on this data, what practices are we going to select based on what we know? And then how do we determine what we're doing is working? So it's basically just a kind of a guide, if you will, for those teams to operate with.
So let's take you into our manual. And we're going to just highlight a few of the sections. It's a pretty comprehensive manual. And when we first introduce teams to this, we spend a full day, a 6-hour professional development day, taking them through the manual so that they have an understanding of all of the different components. So we'll just give you the highlight reel. But it does begin with a definition of peer coaching. And you'll notice that our definitions are not limited to just the work of Jim Knight. So those who are fully entrenched in the work of Jim Knight, which we love him. However, this is not a Jim Knight manual because it's not just instructional coaching, it's instructional coaching, it's systems coaching, and it really does bring together the work of a lot of different resources. And that was purposeful and that was very intentional, so that there was flexibility in how this can be used and applied within a district or within a building. But it is basically classroom implementation of evidence-based literacy practices, but it's the time for teachers to try out approaches and discuss these practices in a very trusted environment. And then we have further, our definition is pretty expansive. Like I said, takes a lot of people into consideration. It provides a supportive, collaborative framework for teachers to bring professional learning to life. If we haven't yet said it enough, it really is about bridging that gap between professional learning and classroom application. It's a confidential process through which 2 or more professional colleagues work together to reflect on current practices, expand, refine, and build new skills, share ideas, teach one another, conduct classroom research, and solve problems. So again, we have these 2 models, instructional versus system, based on Ohio's previous definition, which I mentioned already, and how we've adapted in the manual. So instructional coaching really was that, what's happening in the classroom through observations, modeling, co-teaching, and then conversations. And we also wanted to encourage, as much as humanly possible, video, using video as a tool, not necessarily videotaping each other, starting as simple as just watching videos of other teachers, maybe from the internet and things like that. And then systems was that building level work, or working at a grade level team to analyze data. We have an assessment for building level analysis that we use that came out of Michigan, the RTFI. So analyzing that data, and then obviously coaching for our leadership.
And the reading tiered fidelity inventory, that's what the RTFI, we're really bad at using acronyms.
Sorry.
And explaining them, but the RTFI stands for Reading Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and we do use that with our building level teams. That's a building level fidelity assessment tool that really kind of sets them up nicely for what kind of systems do you have in place to support these high level literacy practices that your teachers are engaged in. And the RTFI really does have a natural coaching scope and sequence as well. So that really helped to establish some further solidify the systems work that was occurring in our buildings.
So now you're up, everybody. In the chat box, does your state have a definition of coaching that you're currently using in any capacity? So we're looking to you folks.
And I'm very interested in seeing this as well,
And you can just
just
put
to
in yes.
encourage people.
You can just put in yes or no. You don't have to.
Although if people have the definition handy, we'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have the definition already, like Michelle and I always say, we haven't had an original thought in about 15 years.
Which makes you efficient and smart.
Yes, exactly.
And I wanted to, while people are thinking about whether or not they have a definition of coaching in their state, I wanted to bring up, when you were talking about encouraging people to use video, I saw a speaker, and I'm not going to remember his name right now, but he was like a Corwin webinar or something like that. And he was talking about, we don't use football or sports coaching that often because we kind of see it as different as the kind of coaching that happens in education systems. But one helpful comparison, he was saying, in football, you would never have a player say, no, I don't want to be videoed. I don't want to see my videotape. I don't want to look at the reel and figure out how I can get better. It just wouldn't be an option. And so he's talking about how we need to get in this mindset that it's just what you do. You have video of your practice, you think about it with others, you get through it. So kind of changing the mindset to be a little bit more like football specifically in this case.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Jennifer, because one of the things that we talked about in doing this, and even with our work with Jim Knight, was that, we just don't naturally like to have ourselves videotaped. But one of the things that we pulled from our Jim Knight training was that you can have yourself being videotaped, but then only you could be the one to watch it. If you're still kind of getting your feet wet with it, have someone videotape you, but then you take the video, watch it yourself, and kind of have some specific things to look for. We also mentioned in the handbook, but even if that is even if that is making you too vulnerable, we recommend watching videos of other teachers, like pull up a YouTube or a teacher channel or something like that, where some good instructional practices have already been videotaped, and watch that to start off with if you just can't stomach the fact of having somebody videotape you and even watching it yourself. But that is true. It is something that we kind of have to start getting over, because the more we watch ourselves doing things, the more, and I don't want to say critical, the more we really kind of see, through the lens of and most importantly, what our students are seeing as well.
Yep, getting it to typical practice in the coaching cycles. And I think we're probably going to be there in a few years now that we have more younger people coming into things that are used to FaceTime and that kind of thing, are raised on that. I'm guessing it'll make things different soon.
Absolutely. I think that people are getting more comfortable. I'm noticing as I work with some of the younger teachers that I'm working with, they're a little more comfortable using video as a tool as part of their everyday practice, which is great. I'm excited that they are.
And I did want to note in the chat pod, we did not have any other states who responded, at least, who said that they had a state definition of coaching, but one did say that their SPDIG had a definition of coaching for their SPDIG specifically.
So in addition to having these definitions, we also then had some suggestions on page 4 with examples under both collaborative, which is again that more informal, versus the formal coaching cycle. And we encourage teachers to start at the collaborative level, as they are beginning stages, because just because it's collaborative doesn't mean it's less impactful. It can be very impactful. And because we have a teaming structure in our state called teacher-based teams, we really wanted to play on that. We wanted to leverage the resources we already had. And underperforming districts in our state have to have teacher-based team meetings weekly. They have a data analysis process, we call the 5-step process, that they have to use to analyze and plan for instruction. So we wanted peer coaching to be a part of that and leverage already the initiatives that are in place. But you could see here some other ideas we gave, including other teaming structures like whether you call them IAT, intervention assistance teams, RTI, people call them different things, but those intervention planning meetings for tier 3 interventions are another great place for peer coaching to occur. But any discussion, including video, is going to be an opportunity for collaborative peer coaching.
And
But
when you
go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry, Carolyn.
When you think about, our peer coaching was really centered around a very targeted professional learning that all the teachers were involved in. If you don't have something like that, article and book studies would be a great place to start too. And in fact, I think coming up, Michelle is going to have some slides that correspond, like certain articles, certain books that would correspond with some of the units that our teachers were going through the training in, but then articles to support that learning if you weren't going through that very targeted PD.
So Carolyn, while you're talking, why don't you continue on our TBT meetings and how we use peer coaching there?
Okay. All right. So we talked about, we have an Ohio improvement process. We have a 5-step process that really kind of takes you through, where you identify critical needs. And it's not just about, looking at the data and either, crying about it or admiring about it. It's really a matter of, what are we going to do about this? We're going to look at our Acadience scores. And we're finding that students are not at benchmark in nonsense word fluency. What does that mean? We're going to open up the student test booklets and take a look at what errors are they making. Is it with consonants? Is it with their short vowels? Are they mixing up certain vowel sounds? So it's really a targeted look at the data, not just an analysis of the numbers. From that, we're going to be taking a look at selecting some evidence-based practices. This was based on some very targeted professional learning, but through some other sources, we could find those practices that would really help to address the learning deficits that we were seeing in the data. One of the things that we really we encourage with peer coaching is to co-plan the lessons. Lesson planning takes a lot of time, but if you're seeing common need across your grade level, how as a team can you work to create common lessons that you're going to administer across the grade level, and then you've got some consistency in your implementation as well. We're all going to use this strategy. Here's how we're going to do it. Perhaps if someone is confused as to what that strategy might look like, hey, you can come watch me do it. Maybe we can give feedback from each other on what this might look like as far as step 3 goes. And then in step 4 and 5, we go back to our classrooms. We teach it. We perhaps do some monitoring of each other, and then we come back with some additional data a week or a few weeks later that says, here's what we did. Here's how we did it. And then now here's some data to show whether or not what we did worked. So we talked about TBT kind of being our teacher-based teams kind of being the vehicle for all of this to happen, for peer coaching to occur. These are already structured meeting times. Many schools, just by sheer nature of their improvement process, kind of, I don't want to say mandate, but mandates, have to have them at least weekly. And so these are already structured times. They're usually about 40 to 45 minutes in length. And so that peer coaching has the ability to occur during those already scheduled meetings. The peer coach is offering suggestions. And what's ideal, what's nice about how we develop this peer coach doesn't have to be the same person every time. If someone has really latched on to the instructional practices and the professional learning, they may volunteer to be the peer coach. If somebody else isn't quite as comfortable, they can kind of not sit back, but they can kind of be more the observer and the listener and the watcher and kind of the gatherer of more information until they feel confident enough to go forward with these practices. But it gives the peer coach really offers the suggestions for these instructional strategies based on the data and based on what they've learned as far as best practices go. The teacher-based team meetings also allow for questions to come up. I'm not quite sure what you mean, clarify that for me. And it really spurs the conversation around the data analysis. Like if you're looking at, like I said, that nonsense word fluency, what does this mean if the students are continually mixing up the short A sound and the short E sound? Is there something that we can do to help remediate this deficit. And then with this structure, the improvement process roles can vary. Sometimes you might be the facilitator, kind of keeping the ball rolling and the meeting moving. Sometimes you might be the timekeeper. Sometimes you might be the note taker. Sometimes you might be the peer coach. And so it really allows for a structure where it's that shared leadership, right? It's that everybody taking ownership of the process to move the numbers.
But none of this happens without that teaming structure. And so that's why we were very lucky that we already had that in place. Which brings us to our next question for you. Does your state have a teaming structure similar to the Ohio Improvement Process, where we meet at teacher-based teams and building leadership teams that you could build off of as well? Please share. We want to steal more ideas. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me bring that back. Sorry about that. I was trying to open the chat and I accidentally stopped sharing. I'm not seeing a whole lot happening in the group chat. Let's see.
We could certainly take your excellent example from the process. Okay. And by the way, our teaming structure is not Michelle and I's process. It was a well-established process before we even started in this work. So yeah.
We built upon, again, the systems that were in place. And that was the great thing about this manual, is that it really did hone in on things that were already happening in Ohio and then added the next step.
So North Carolina.
And I think our 5-step process is very similar to that plan, do, study, act cycle. And so that is, we've actually been working with Learning Forward as well, using their plan, do, study, act cycle to kind of analyze the implementation of some of our other statewide work. And we found a lot of alignment. Wonderful. So we mentioned before that the original reason we started this model was because it was a way of bringing the professional learning that was really a large investment into the classroom to ensure implementation in the classroom, to ensure practice, changes the teacher practice. And so peer coaching became the catalyst for ensuring that professional learning made it to classroom application. And that's what instructional coaching does. It is the next step in that professional learning. It's the sustainability, it's the ongoing work of professional learning to ensure that more than that very small percentage of teachers actually implement the work. And so I love this quote from Jim Knight: coaches help take all the ideas and practices they are learning and bring them to life. Without coaching, too often, no significant change occurs. So what we found in one of our pilot districts, for example, is that as the teachers were trained in the professional development on the science of reading, in this case we use letters, language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling, some of the teachers implemented the practices and more quickly, and were eager to learn more and to practice it. And so they became very natural peer coaches. And so we invited other teachers to watch them, or if they were title teachers, we pushed them into the general education classroom to model these instructional strategies and practices so that other teachers could have that peer model. So it really was about bringing the PD to life and ensuring its implementation. And then one of my other favorite uses of peer coaching was of the IAT and the MTSS meetings. So intervention assistance teams and multi-tiered system of supports. I have got to stop with the acronyms. But peer coaching is a very logical, it has a logical place within those meetings where we look at what types of support our students need in the science of reading. So to determine what type of informal diagnostic data needs to be collected, looking at the student work, not just the data, planning those interventions, gathering in the data after the interventions have been implemented to see if it's been working. How are we progress monitoring it? Reflecting on the impact and then suggesting adjustments. So a peer coach really plays a valuable role in these meetings. And so if, for example, one of the peer coaching trainings we had a group of title teachers that go to all of the MTSS meetings. And so they were trained in peer coaching so that they could bring these suggestions to the meetings and ensure that it happened appropriately. And then we wanted to make sure that the tier 2 and tier 3 interventions built on core instruction were not in place of core instruction. So we offered some additional training for our peer coaches in MTSS, ensuring that they understood how tier 2 and tier 3 were in addition to, not instead of, core instruction. Anything to add to this section, Carolyn?
Yeah, we also have a process that we're working through right now. Michelle's kind of leading that work across the state, is establishing decision rules for multi-tiered system of supports, and deciding, yes, you're going to have these interventions, but which interventions based on which data and entrance criteria, exit criteria. So it's really it's really about setting up this system and having somebody who can for certain times take the lead and kind of facilitate and coach through the right questions to ask of the right people to lead towards that that ultimate end goal.
And the idea is to have things written down so that no one has to guess. It's all written down. So even those decision rules are all written down, but you have someone to guide them through the process, but nothing is left to guesswork. It is all documented and available for everyone involved. So even those, there's the next slide. There's our decision rules. We have decision rules in place that we're piloting across the state through our work, yet another initiative with Learning Forward and What Matters Now Network. And again, we like to make sure that there's this cohesiveness between all of the initiatives. And so these decision rules were based on the literacy work that we've been doing. And they look at the data from DIBELS, formerly known as DIBELS, currently known as Acadience, and AIMSweb to determine what additional assessments are necessary and then determine the appropriate intervention. So we wanted to get away from that one-size-fits-all intervention to make sure that the interventions were diagnostic and based on specific data to meet students' needs so that we diagnose before we prescribe. And this is all documented, so the peer coach just leads the teachers through this rather than trying to come up with this all on their own. Yet another question for you. So how are you making decisions, database decisions for multi-tiered system of supports? How are you all determining those supports for students? Specifically, in our case, we focused on literacy. But oh my goodness, if someone has some for math, that would be really nice. By the way, Carolyn and I will be presenting on this topic on peer coaching and our decision rules at the Learning Forward conference this December in St. Louis. If anyone will be there, come see us.
I'm definitely going to be at your session, just so you know. You'll have
Oh, good. Good.
I'm sure many more.
Decision rules. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome. So each school has decision rules. One of the things that we're trying to do is to take the decision rules we already have for Acadience and DIBEL and AIMSweb and take them statewide so that districts can adjust them a little bit based on the high quality instructional materials that they have on site, but that there is still an overall cohesiveness because some districts don't have the background to know where to even begin.
So while they started as being very specific, we almost need to generalize them to help more districts start to implement them and devise their own.
But the data out of our Plan, Do, Study, Act work has been wonderful with Learning Forward. We've really found that these teams, through use of coaching, but also the decision rules, they feel that the teaming is so much more effective, and that the instructional strategies are more effective now too. So if these students are making gains, they're using a more effective planning process, and they've shifted some of their focus to high quality instructional materials. Okay, so now our next step is, what materials do we need? What materials do we have? And so we've had some really great feedback from our pilot districts that have been using these decision rules. Okay, I'm not seeing much more happening in the chat box, so I'm going to power forward. Carolyn, you want to tackle book studies and article studies?
Yeah, so when we first started putting this together, we were working with a technical assistance consultant from the American Institute of Research, and she was kind of like our Mary Poppins and Yoda all rolled up in one. She really helped guide us through this process. But we started calling out all these, you know, great books that we had read and that would be great, you know, book studies. And she finally said, teachers don't have that kind of time to do like these whole massive book studies. They need quick, they need, you know, get to the point articles that they can work off of. And so that's where these come from. These are all articles that, and I believe if they send you the PDF, you can click on each of those and then it'll take you to the actual PDF of them. So all of these are articles that support the topics that our teachers were going through in their letters unit. So, you know, if you're going through and you're starting the process of kind of transitioning to science of reading practices and programs, you know, the first thing you need to read as teaching reading is Rocket Science by Louisa Moats. She really outlines the kind of the call to action and what's really needed in terms of teaching reading and what our brain is doing when we're reading. And then we just kind of outline through each of the different letters units based on the topic. That way the teachers could, they had their own learning through their letters professional learning, but if other districts were not using the letters professional learning, these were articles to help kind of move them along. So, you know, unit 1 is always kind of the science behind everything. Units 2 and 3 about, you know, phonological awareness and phonics, and, you know, and so on, writing, vocabulary, instructional strategies for comprehension, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we landed on article studies more than whole book studies.
Okay. And then again, when it came to video analysis, although we would love for them to videotape each other and then work together and collaboratively to reflect on those videos, and we know that a lot of teachers aren't ready to start there. So we said, okay, maybe we start with analysis of a third-party video. And so some resources we suggested were Anita Archer, because she has wonderful vocabulary instructional routines, which can allow for conversation from 2 different perspectives, from the perspective of the teacher, but also perspective of the student. So looking at the students during one view and then looking at the teacher during another. And then a lot of districts in our state are embracing phonemic awareness for the first time, and explicit systematic instruction in phonemic awareness. So many of them have been using the Haggerty phonemic awareness curriculum. So we said, if that's something that you're doing, before, if you're not comfortable videotaping yourselves, watch some of the videos of other teachers. Pennsylvania especially, they have wonderful videos of their teachers implementing Haggerty phonemic awareness instruction, and that provides for great conversation and reflection. And then move on to watching yourself. And Jim Knight has some great forms and documents for conversation and reflection, and we included some of his conversation starters here, including watching the video, just looking at the students, and then maybe watching a video also and looking at it from the perspective of the teacher. So we know that video can be powerful, and ultimately at the end of the day, the teacher who is in the video, who created the video, owns the video. So it never leaves the hands of that teacher, although multiple people can watch it in a peer coaching experience. The teacher who recorded it and who is in it owns it, so it can be deleted after that. Anything to add on video, Carolyn?
No, I think you got everything from there.
You want to tackle modeling and observation, my friend?
Sure. So modeling and observation is really it's a key component of this peer coaching model, because we're learning from each other, and we're kind of putting it out there that none of us right now are experts in this, and through watching each other, through talking about what we saw, that's how we improve our practices. We really want to express how much we included and almost required the inclusion of title teachers and intervention specialists, not only in our team meetings, but also in pushing into the general education classroom, just to watch the instruction, but also serve as models for those instructional strategies. So we really relied on those experts in the field to help us do that. Modeling and observation, it gives teachers the opportunity to observe each other. We kind of tried to kind of brainstorm with each other around, when would be a good time to do that. Some teachers were willing to give up their planning time to go watch somebody else do a lesson, or put together a lesson, because they knew that even though they were giving up some planning time, they were going to have some opportunity to plan during that teacher-based team time, based on what they saw in the lesson and what they needed to do in their classrooms. And then we also talked about instructional rounds, where groups of teachers could go and kind of observe in a fishbowl type setting. Some were more willing to engage in that than others, but we always wanted to make sure that they knew that these instructional rounds were not evaluation instructional rounds. And that's why, sometimes the principal came, sometimes they didn't come, but in the cases where principals would come, it was very much understood that principal was in there to learn and not to evaluate. And so that would be another way to do that whole modeling and observation, and then have that opportunity to debrief about what they saw, because that's a big part of the rounds and the observation process. You go in, you watch, you're looking for something, and then you all come back out and you say what you saw, what went well with that, and what you learned from that particular piece of instruction.
So most of what we've discussed have been these collaborative examples, and it's not to say that we didn't train teachers on the more formal examples. We did actually offer an overview of coaching cycles, specifically looking at Jim Knight's coaching cycle, but then also looking at another coaching cycle that wasn't Jim Knight, because we didn't want to kind of force that this was, the Jim Knight way of doing things only, although again, we love him. But we wanted to offer options and suggestions. So that the second step would be to move into more formal coaching practices. So that's why there were 2 stages for implementation. You would start with collaborative and then moving into more formal coaching cycle type of coaching. But all of this ultimately was really based on this idea that if you don't have this coaching, we're never going to see changes in our district. So we based this on a question that we had been asked based on the work of Gusky, which is, after professional learning, what changes first? And so we're going to ask you to, in your chat box, tell us what you think changes first, and then second, and then third. So put these in order. So a teacher goes to PD. What changes first? Do we change teacher beliefs? Do we change teacher behavior? And do we change student outcomes? What do we want to change first, and ultimately to have that system change that we're looking for? So go ahead in your chat box.
So type those in the order that you think changes first. What changes first, next, and then finally.
And then don't worry, we'll give you the answers.
And just to clarify, you all are asking what does occur, not necessarily what you want to occur, right? I heard both.
Well, it's really kind of what we want to try to push to happen, but
Okay,
yes.
got it.
Yes.
And the
Because
order,
we learned this valuable lesson because for a time we tried to go a different direction, and we realized we weren't really getting the change you were looking for. And so what changes first, and I'm seeing this happen a lot, is teacher behavior, and that's absolutely true. And Carolyn and I, through our work and the other regional early literacy specialists, we really at first tried to change teacher beliefs. And we know that that is not the way we want to impact system change. That instead, first we want to change teacher behavior. So that's what peer coaching is all about. Peer coaching changes teacher behavior, changing the teacher practice first. And then when that happens, student outcomes change. And then when that happens, teacher beliefs change. And science of reading has been very hard in our state to change teachers' beliefs in the science of reading so that they will understand the importance of implementation of the science of reading. But we found through peer coaching and other structures like this, through coaching in general, we were able to change teacher behavior. And then now the student data starts to increase. So teachers would call about students who weren't reading, suddenly learning to read, and how they were going to refer these kids for IEPs, and they ended up not needing IEP referral. And it's been really wonderful. So we changed the teacher practice, then the student outcome changed, and finally teacher beliefs changed. And that's what we noticed around our state and most of the work we've done here with literacy. And I see that in the answer, and that's not from us, that's from Gusty. You know, again, Carolyn and I, we haven't had an original thought in quite some time. We are right on time. Carolyn, I'm so proud of us.
very good. But we would like, if anybody has questions, and then also feel free to email us if you so choose. But that is all we have for today.
And their manual is available to you. And Lynn, is it already on the webpage?
It's not there yet, but I will be adding it and then sending out a notice to all of our participants today that the event recording and that manual is available to them on the SIG Network webpage for the community of coaching.
Yep, great. Because it is so nice to hear about all these elements and processes and ideas and readings and videos, and then have access to the basis for them all. We have a thank you, great information in the chat pod. So no questions, no how-tos.
The manual will be available to you. So if you look through it and you have any questions, we would be happy to elaborate or share on the experiences that influence the manual and the different, we have a very large reference page of all of the different resources we pulled from. We were very lucky to have a wonderful mentor from AIR who helped us, and we did a lot of research prior to putting this together. We didn't want this to be the work of one person or one theoretical model. We wanted this to be the collaboration of multiple. So feel free, as you look at it, to give us an email or a call.
Yeah. I appreciate you all providing information here, and I agree. I think you run some risk when there's just one model or one name you're using all the time. You know, if someone's had a bad experience, you know, you never know. And so I appreciate that you're pulling it from lots of different directions. It's a phrase I've been hearing a lot lately. You're meeting people where they are, right, and building up and providing all kinds of scaffolding to get people to the more formal coaching. I like how you're trying to create some standardization for districts and schools and their decision making, using what they have available to them and perhaps thinking about what they might need in the future. So your example of now. So thank you so much for spending your time today with us. Thank you for putting together this great presentation. And I also appreciate that you brought up toward the end this idea that, the reading wars are still occurring, whatever you want to call them. We have some philosophical differences out there. And so getting at evidence-based practices, how do you do that? And universities sometimes is challenging at the university level, so that we're talking about at the practice level. And again, that's that, we're working together as teams. We want this change to happen. Here's a practice you can try is much different than that's wrong. Here's the evidence base, read this article, right? So that sounds like a very good
Well, and actually that might be a conversation for another day, because we actually have some ongoing work with some universities in our state on changing those practices. So that might be
oh, good.
that might be a conversation for another time with us. So yeah.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. All right. And then we had a comment that I agree peer coaching being a potentially effective strategy for sustainability.
It was like North Carolina has similar work. Perfect. Okay.
Great. Oh, good. And I want to use your guide. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Michelle and Carolyn. It was so nice working with you, and I am looking forward. I was just thinking about your Learning Forward. I need to get the number for that. It's hard to figure out when things are happening, which are good. But I do plan on coming to your session, and awesome. I look forward to working with you in the future.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.